The rain came in sideways sheets, driven by prairie winds that swept across the flat expanse of Maple Glen, Missouri. A rusted mailbox leaned like a drunk at the edge of the gravel driveway, its flag long gone, its nameplate barely legible through the rust. Emily Carter sat behind the wheel of her aging Subaru, windshield wipers struggling to keep up, staring through the storm at the property that had been on her screen for the last 6 weeks. 260 acres of overgrown pasture land and a crumbling 19th century log farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been touched since Truman was in office. She took a slow breath. This was either salvation or her final mistake. "Here we are," she murmured to herself, then turned to check the back seat. Lucas was asleep, a tangle of limbs and earbuds, his tablet still faintly glowing despite the no-signal icon blinking in the corner. Ella sat quietly beside him, gazing out her window, her small fingers tracing foggy spirals on the glass. Even in silence, Emily could feel her daughter's unease. "You okay, honey?" she asked. Ella no respondió al principio. Then, with her usual eerie calm, she said, "It smells like something old here, like someone's waiting." Emily gave a tight smile, ignoring the chill that crept up her spine. "That's just the rain, and maybe some mold." She stepped out of the car, the cold rain soaking her flannel within seconds. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its wide porch sagging in the middle, shutters half-hanging, and a chimney choked with ivy. To her left, a barn, more gray than red now, stood silent and slumped, like an old man too tired to argue with gravity. Most would call it a disaster. Emily saw a chance. Barely, but a chance, nonetheless. Nathan Doyle emerged from the barn's side door, wearing a waxed jacket and holding a clipboard, shielding it with a plastic sleeve. He waved as he jogged over, boots kicking up muddy splashes. "You sure you want to do this today?" he called over the downpour. "It's not exactly brochure weather." Emily offered a wet chuckle. "Might as well see it at its worst, right? If it doesn't scare me now." Nathan grinned, then turned to gesture toward the house. "Let me show you around. Mind the steps. Boards are slick." As they walked, Nathan gave his usual tour spiel, pointing out the barn's original timber framing, the creek that sometimes flooded in spring, and the field where blackberries still grew wild. But as they neared the house, his tone changed. "Look, before we go in, I need to tell you something," he said, pausing on the warped porch boards. "This place has a bit of a reputation." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I saw the comments online. Cursed, haunted, government spooks. Which one is it today?" Nathan smirked, but there was something guarded behind it. "Depends on who you ask. The last 3 owners left in less than 2 years each. One claimed they kept losing time, hours, even full days they couldn't account for. Another swore their dog could hear things underground. The third, well, she stopped returning my calls after saying she woke up with blood coming out of her radio." Emily blinked. "That sounds elaborate." "I know, but the thing is, each one found something in the house they couldn't explain. Documents, devices, old keys in new places. And one guy filed a complaint that his tools kept vanishing and reappearing buried in the field." Emily stepped past him, placing her hand on the doorknob. "Maybe they were just bad at organizing." Nathan gave a dry laugh. "Maybe. Or maybe this place doesn't like being forgotten." The door creaked open with a long, breathy groan, and the scent of mildew, dry rot, and something else, faint, metallic, hit her like a whisper from another time. The entryway was dark, save for the pale light that filtered through warped blinds. The floor sagged in places, and a trail of rainwater from a broken window puddled beneath a crooked coat rack. She walked in slowly, boots echoing in the silence. The house was furnished, strangely so. A velvet couch covered in a white sheet, an upright piano missing half its keys. A child's wooden rocking horse sat in the corner, its paint chipped, but its eyes still wide and glossy. The air felt thick. Emily ran her fingers along the banister, noting the worn grooves where generations of hands must have gripped. "Place feels like it's waiting for something," Nathan said behind her, voice lower now. Emily turned toward him. Or someone. They explored the first floor. Kitchen with yellowed appliances, a pantry with jars of something long fossilized, and a library with books so brittle she was afraid to touch them. Upstairs, bedrooms with faded wallpaper. One still had a mobile hanging above the bed, spun slightly even though no air moved. "You said the auction is tomorrow?" she asked as they returned to the main hall. Nathan nodded. "Starting bid's $112,000. Property sold as is. No inspection, as you know." "Because of the EPA thing?" "Yeah, the land flagged during a Cold War review. Old wiring, possible groundwater contamination, abandoned telecom lines. Hell, nobody's been allowed to dig near the east pasture since '86. Emily let out a breath, the weight of her life pressing in again. Her savings were in free fall. She was down to two final options, this or a motel with hourly rates and no space for kids. And yet, something about this place pulled at her. Not just the price, not just the desperation, something quieter, deeper, as if some thread in her soul had always known she would end up here. She turned to face Nathan. "I'm going to bid." He hesitated. "Emily, I'm not trying to scare you off, but are you sure? You've got two young kids. If the power goes out, if the water's bad, if the stories are even half true." "I'm sure," she said, with more conviction than she felt. "I don't know why, but I need this place." Nathan studied her, then gave a small nod. "All right, I'll prep the paperwork. Auction starts at 9 a.m. sharp." As they stepped outside, the rain had softened to a mist. Ella stood near the car, staring at the house, her small figure unmoving. Emily called to her, "Ella, baby, you okay?" Ella looked back and said matter-of-factly, "The house knows your name." Emily froze. "What did you say?" But Ella had already climbed into the car and shut the door, as if what she'd said meant nothing at all. Emily stood there for another long moment, the mist curling around her, the house looming behind, and 1,000 questions spiraling in her chest like autumn leaves in the wind. Tomorrow, she'd place a bid on a forgotten property most people were too afraid to touch. But for her, it felt less like a gamble and more like an answer. Something was waiting, and whether it was sanctuary or damnation. Emily Carter was about to find out. The wind carried a chill that didn't belong to early October. It swept through the rustling sycamores lining the dirt road as Emily Carter's old SUV bumped its way up the gravel path. In the back seat, Lucas and Ella sat silently, each clutching a box on their lap, their last bits of what used to be a normal life. The twins hadn't said much since they left the shelter 2 hours earlier. Ella stared out the window, her wide, hazel eyes fixed on the shifting tree line. Lucas, meanwhile, was busy pressing buttons on a toy walkie-talkie that hadn't worked since they'd left St. Louis. "Here we are," Emily murmured as the house came into view. The farmhouse stood like a monument from another time, its wooden planks weathered to a grayish hue, the shutters hanging at odd angles like tired eyelids. The gabled roof dipped slightly to one side, and the front porch looked as if it might sigh under the weight of one more season. A tangle of dry weeds clung to the picket fence, and the autumn mist curled around the property like smoke. Ella se inclinó hacia adelante. "It looks quiet." "Too quiet," Lucas muttered, "like the kind of place where ghosts live." Emily cut the engine and exhaled. "Let's not start with ghost stories, okay?" They carried boxes one by one, stepping carefully across the sagging porch. The front door groaned open with a sound so human it made Emily pause. Inside, the air was dense with dust and disuse. It smelled of old wood, rusted iron, and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from neglect, but from waiting. The furniture was still there, not just a random chair or two, but all of it. A rocking chair in the corner, an upright piano with yellowed keys, curtains that hadn't been drawn in years. On the mantel sat a ceramic vase filled with dried flowers and an oil lamp half full of hardened wax. A teacup still sat on the kitchen table, stained with brown rings, as if someone had just stepped out mid-sip and never returned. Emily ran her hand over the counter, dust lifted like fog. "This is weird," she said under her breath. Lucas darted into the living room. "Hey, there's a record player, and books, old ones." He blew on a leather-bound volume and coughed as dust mushroomed in the air. Ella lingered by the doorway, arms folded. Why did they leave everything? Emily didn't answer. The silence in the house felt strange, not just the absence of sound, but the sense that something had been paused, frozen, a life interrupted mid-chapter. Later that afternoon, as the sky darkened to a pewter gray, Emily explored the basement door she had noticed during the initial walkthrough. It sat partially obscured behind a wooden pantry shelf in the kitchen. Lucas had pointed it out while searching for snacks. There's a draft coming from back here, he said, squinting. Like cold air. Emily pushed the shelf aside with effort, revealing a heavy oak door fitted with a thick, rusted iron lock. It was unlike anything she'd seen before. The metal was engraved with swirling symbols that had faded with time, but there was no mistaking the craftsmanship. It was old. Civil War, old. She tugged on it. It didn't budge. No one mentioned a locked cellar, she murmured, inspecting the frame. This isn't just storage. Someone wanted this shut for good. That night, after a quick meal of microwaved noodles and juice boxes eaten on the living room floor, the twins got ready for bed. With the electricity only partially restored, they huddled in sleeping bags under candlelight, whispering stories, while the wind scratched at the windows. Emily lay awake, well past midnight, scrolling through her phone until the signal disappeared again, leaving her in digital silence. She finally dozed off, her body tense and mind racing. Around 3:12 a.m., Lucas stirred. Mom? Emily sat up, heart thudding. What's wrong? I had a dream, he said, rubbing his eyes. There was a man. He had a long coat and a funny hat. He looked at me but didn't say anything. Just pointed down. Down? He nodded. Like below the floor, the basement. Emily's skin prickled. A moment later, Ella stirred too. I saw him too, she whispered. He was standing in the corner of the kitchen. He kept pointing at the wall. Emily's breath caught. Did he say anything to you? Number. But I felt like he wanted us to find something. They didn't say anything else after that. Emily tucked them back into their sleeping bags and stayed awake the rest of the night, listening to every creak and shift of the house. By morning, the mist had thickened, hanging low over the fields like a veil. Emily stepped outside to get some air and check on the barn. The grass was slick with dew, and her boots left deep impressions in the soil. The barn stood about 50 yards from the house, its red paint peeled to reveal the raw timber beneath. She walked toward it slowly, past the rusted clothesline and overgrown herb garden. Then she saw it. The padlock on the barn door had been sliced clean, like someone had used bolt cutters. The door itself hung open by an inch. Emily reached out and pushed. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight, filtering through broken slats. Old hay bales rotted in the corners, and rusted farm tools leaned against the walls. But in the far back corner, beneath a collapsed section of the roof, was a footprint. Recent. Fresh. Someone had been here. Emily backed out slowly, her heart beginning to race. She scanned the horizon. No cars, no movement. But a chill ran up her spine, and it wasn't from the weather. She returned to the house, bolted the front and back doors, and checked on the twins. They were eating cereal out of plastic bowls, watching static on the old television set. Don't go outside without me, Emily said firmly. Lucas looked up. Are we in trouble? No, she said. We're just getting used to our new home. That night, as the sun dipped below the trees and the fog returned thicker than ever, Emily sat alone in the kitchen. She stared at the cellar door, wondering what lay beneath it, wondering why she felt both afraid and drawn to whatever was locked away under her feet. The house had gone quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was a silence that pressed against the walls, a silence that watched. Emily had stared at the rusted lock on the cellar door for 3 days. It loomed in the corner of her mind, silent but insistent, like a riddle daring her to solve it. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the siding, only sharpened her unease. The lock was more than old. It was purposeful, a relic of a time when secrets were sealed away with iron, not encryption. And now those secrets were whispering to her. On a gray Tuesday morning, with the air thick from an overnight rain, Emily rolled up her sleeves, clipped back her hair, and dragged the bolt cutters down to the basement. The children were upstairs, Ella sketching in her notebook while Lucas took apart an old radio he'd found in the barn. Emily didn't tell them what she planned to do. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be shut again. The lock groaned under pressure but didn't snap easily. It took 3 hard squeezes, each one shaking her elbows to the bone, before the ancient metal surrendered with a sharp, resentful crack. The door gave way with a creak that seemed to echo for miles, revealing a stone stairwell steeped in shadows and dust. The air that rushed out was stale but not foul. It smelled of dry earth, aged wood, and something faintly metallic, like the scent left behind after thunder. Emily clicked on her flashlight and descended cautiously, brushing cobwebs from her face, one foot carefully placed after another. The stairs led down farther than she expected, until she reached a floor of solid limestone blocks. At the center of the room sat a large wooden trunk. Dark, nearly black with age, its brass hinges had turned green from oxidization. It looked out of place in this part of Missouri, more like something you'd expect to find in a museum vault. A symbol had been burned into the lid, a 6-pointed star encircling an eagle clutching arrows. Emily crouched down, her breath catching as her fingers brushed over the clasp. It wasn't locked. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth and aged velvet, lay bundles of parchment and old stationery. One envelope caught her eye immediately. Heavy cream-colored paper with an embossed seal of the United States. The ink was still legible, faded, but hauntingly elegant. The letter was dated March 10th, 1864. To the appointed custodian of these materials, by order of President Abraham Lincoln, the contents of this repository are considered essential to the preservation of national integrity. The bearer of this commission is henceforth recognized as guardian of the Republic's truths. Act with courage. Protect with conscience. Signed, A. Lincoln Emily's hands trembled. The words felt impossible. A prank? A forgery? But the signature looked authentic, fluid, determined. She knew enough about documents to recognize 19th century cursive. The paper was brittle but real. She sat back against the stone wall, the letter resting on her knees, her breath ragged. The phrase, "Guardian of the Republic's truths," repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. Lucas's voice broke the spell. "Mom?" he called from above. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. I'll be right up." She tucked the Lincoln letter back into its envelope and continued searching through the trunk. Dozens of documents were stacked beneath it: field reports, coded telegrams, reconnaissance sketches. Some were hand-penned in delicate script. Others were typed on translucent onion skin paper. All bore some variant of federal markings: War Department, Confidential Division, Bureau of Intelligence. Most were dated between 1861 and 1865, but it wasn't until she lifted the false bottom of the trunk, disguised as part of the lining, that she discovered something even stranger. A thin, waxy cloth hid a folded parchment sheet covered in tiny sharp notations and odd markings. Along the edges were symbols, some that resembled old alchemical signs, others more modern, like early encryption keys. In the bottom right corner, a phrase had been scrawled in barely legible pencil: "Maple Glen, final relay. Only blood may break the seal." Emily stared at it, feeling goosebumps rise along her arms. Maple Glen. This wasn't just a coincidence. That night, after putting the twins to bed, she scanned the document with her phone. But as she tried uploading it to her laptop, the screen froze. Her connection blinked in and out, then dropped altogether. She frowned and tried her mobile hotspot. No luck. Her browser returned a string of cryptic errors: network unreachable, no DNS found, and once, unsettlingly, external signal detected, access denied. She wasn't sure what was worse, the idea that her hardware was failing, or that someone was watching her. She looked around the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the blinking light on the smoke detector. Everything felt normal, but she knew it wasn't. She could feel it in her spine. The air was too quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was alert, like something was holding its breath. Later that evening, Lucas padded into her room, rubbing his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "I saw him again." The man in the uniform. Emily sat up straight. "In your dream?" He nodded, crawling into bed beside her. He was standing at the top of the stairs this time, holding a letter. He said, "Don't be afraid of the truth. It's already yours." Emily tried to hide her alarm. She hadn't told the kids about the documents, hadn't shown them the letter. Lucas couldn't possibly know. But then Ella appeared in the doorway. "His buttons were silver," she said softly, eyes wide, "and there was a scar on his cheek." Emily's heart dropped. Two children, one shared dream, a man in uniform with a message. She spent the rest of the night hunched over the old papers in the cellar, scanning, documenting, and cross-referencing. She searched for references to Maple Glen, to Guardians, to anything tying her family name to these materials. She found none. But still, something about the letter, the map, and that coded phrase made her feel chosen. Not in a grand or heroic way, but in the quiet, undeniable sense that her being here was no accident. Upstairs, the router flickered back to life briefly, just long enough for one email to land in her inbox with no sender listed. Subject line, "You opened it." There was no message in the body, just a single attachment, an image of her front door from outside. Emily's blood ran cold. She closed the laptop, locked every window, pulled the twins into her room, and didn't sleep until the sun broke across the eastern edge of the property. Somehow, she knew, the Guardian had been waiting. And now, the world knew she had answered the call. The wind carried a strange stillness that morning, the kind that made leaves hesitate mid-fall. Emily stood at the edge of the basement doorway, eyes narrowing at the seam between two stone walls. Something didn't look right. A faint draft seeped through the corner, unnatural, cool, and steady. She crouched down, her fingers tracing the edges of the stone, then pressed. To her surprise, it gave slightly. She pushed harder. A soft click echoed, and the panel shifted, revealing a narrow crawl space concealed behind a wall of cleverly stacked faux stone. "What the?" Emily whispered. The air beyond was different, thicker somehow, musky and metallic. She turned back toward the stairs. "Lucas, grab my flashlight!" Moments later, Lucas bounded down with his usual mix of excitement and worry. "Is that another room?" "I think so," she nodded, sliding her hand along the hidden wall. They crawled inside, one after the other, flashlight beam cutting through years of untouched dust. The tunnel was no more than 5 feet tall and barely 2 feet wide, with old metal conduits running along the ceiling. At the end, a rusted steel door stood upright, its surface scarred by age and corrosion. A faded U.S. government seal could just barely be seen near the bottom corner. Lucas, fidgeting with curiosity, reached toward an old breaker box beside the door. "What does this do?" "Wait, Lucas, don't..." Too late. The boy's fingers brushed a weathered switch, and with a low hum, something deep within the walls stirred to life. Static filled the air, followed by a high-pitched beep. Then silence. And then a slow, steady, pulsing tone began to emit from a nearby panel on the floor. Emily's breath caught. "That's a signal." Lucas stared. "What kind of signal?" Emily knelt down, watching as a green light blinked in rhythmic pulses. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Over and over. Morse code? She wasn't sure. But it was deliberate. Back upstairs, Emily rushed to her laptop. The screen stayed black for a few seconds longer than usual before flickering to life. When she opened her audio interface software and tuned into a shortwave band, a burst of garbled digital noise filled the speakers, punctuated by that same blinking rhythm. That night, Ella tugged at her mom's sleeve while brushing her teeth. "Mom, can I show you something?" Emily followed her daughter out to the edge of the woods behind the barn. Ella pointed at a mound of dirt and overgrowth. "I saw it in my dream. I think there's something under there." Emily's first instinct was to write it off, but she didn't. Instead, she retrieved a shovel and began digging. 6 inches down, her blades struck metal. They worked together, pushing dirt aside until a long, rusted antenna lay exposed. It was snapped in two, the base anchored into a concrete block. Near the base, a small hatch was embedded into the ground. Inside the hatch was something unexpected, a Cold War-era military tracking device. The serial number was etched cleanly into the side. U.S. Stratcom, 1963. Emily stared at it, stunned. Why would something like this be buried in our backyard? Lucas, who'd come running at Ella's call, stood beside her. Is it still on? A soft red light blinked from the underside. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed, Emily sat in front of the camera console she'd installed around the property. For the past few nights, something had felt off. She hit rewind on the night feed from the back barn camera and watched. At exactly 2 a.m., the feed glitched, just like it had every night since they moved in. The video turned black, then static, then nothing. Every camera, every night, always at 2 a.m. Power outage? Emily murmured to herself. She checked the logs, no interruption recorded in the main system. The footage simply vanished. The next morning, she drove into town and met with Nathan Doyle again, this time with far more urgency. She laid the photos on his office table, the antenna, the Cold War device, and screenshots of the camera logs. Nathan adjusted his glasses and leaned in. This isn't just a random signal. What you found is a military-grade positioning node, mid-20th century, designed to reroute encrypted messages between hidden facilities. Emily blinked. Here? In Maple Glen? Nathan nodded gravely. This entire town was once part of a classified routing system. During the Cold War, the government scattered relay points across the Midwest. Farms, churches, even school basements. They used everyday structures to hide national infrastructure. Yours, he tapped the photo, was likely one of the last standing transmission junctions. But why the secrecy now? Emily asked. Why the camera blackouts? The signal? Nathan's voice lowered. If something was reactivated, either by accident or design, it means someone's listening. A chill spread down her spine. Later that night, unable to sleep, Emily walked back down into the hidden crawl space. She stared at the humming signal unit, now blinking faster. The rhythm had changed. 3 long, 1 short, 1 long. It felt like a countdown. The morning light filtered weakly through the farmhouse windows, casting long, pale stripes across the wooden floor. Emily sat at the kitchen table, flipping slowly through the weathered journal they had recovered from the hidden room beneath the house. The paper was brittle, its edges frayed and browned by time, but the handwriting inside was surprisingly elegant. Neat cursive lines written in deep black ink that hadn't faded much at all. She was midway through deciphering a page filled with what looked like inventory logs when a folded sheet slipped out from between the binding. It fluttered to the ground like a falling leaf, landing face up. Emily bent down to retrieve it and froze. Embossed at the top of the page was a thick, faded seal. United States Office of Strategic Coordination, 1952. Her eyes narrowed. She'd never heard of such an office, and she'd read enough history books to know when something wasn't public knowledge. The paper itself felt official, watermarked, crisp despite the decades, and marked confidential in red at the bottom. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a map. No, not just a map. A sprawling, interconnected web of nodes and lines stretched across it, spanning continents. The title read, Active Intelligence Relay Networks, Tier 4, unclassified, not for distribution. Cities she didn't recognize were circled in red. Some points on the map were coded, marked only with initials and strange numeric sequences. At the center of the spiderweb, a star labeled MG-CIVSITE-001. Maple Glen. Her fingers trembled as she traced the star. This place, it was never just a farm. She reached for her phone to take a photo, but her screen remained black. No matter how many times she tapped the power button, nothing happened. Across the room, the wall clock had stopped ticking. The radio blinked twice, then died. She didn't even need to ask. Lucas was already standing in the doorway. "It's happening again," he whispered, "like last night." Emily stood. "Get Nathan." Nathan Doyle arrived 20 minutes later, his arms full of books and folders that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in decades. He wore a faded navy jacket and a look of such intense curiosity it bordered on excitement. Emily showed him the document, his face drained of color. "Office of Strategic Coordination?" he said softly. "That's impossible. That office was dissolved before it was ever acknowledged. It was the precursor to the CIA Deep Black. Congress didn't even know it existed." "So what is this map?" Emily asked. "It connects half the globe." Nathan spread the paper on the table, his finger scanning the notations. These are intelligence relay points, safe houses, civilian contact zones. Some were tied to Cold War espionage, but this is broader, international, and this site. He pointed to the central star. This means your farm was command central, not just a drop point, but a hub. Emily sat heavily in the chair, her mind spinning. Why here? Nathan hesitated, then pulled a thin envelope from his bag. I found something else, in the records office. There's an archived land deed, dated 1865, signed by a woman named L. J. Carter. She's listed as the original owner of the property. And according to the census, she wasn't just a landowner. She was a known intelligence operative for the Union Army. Emily blinked. Carter? Yeah, Nathan looked up. Same last name. She shook her head. That could just be coincidence. Nathan raised an eyebrow. It could, or you're her direct descendant, and that means, legally, this property and everything buried with it still falls under your stewardship, at least according to the strategic coordination rules, if those rules were ever dissolved at all. Emily swallowed hard. She hadn't even processed the idea of being connected to this history, let alone inheriting it. That night, the air inside the house felt different. Lucas had grown quiet after dinner, curling up on the couch without even reaching for his tablet, a rarity. He kept staring at the ceiling, then glancing toward the back door. Mom, he said suddenly, the buzzing is coming back. Emily turned from the sink. What buzzing? Lucas touched his temples. Like the air's moving too fast, but not outside, in here. He looked at her, serious. It's coming from under the floor. Emily crouched next to him. You're not feeling sick, are you? Number. It's like when the TV gets static, but in my head. I think something's turning on. She glanced toward the basement hatch, now sealed again with the same rusty padlock. The idea of electromagnetic pulses, flickering underground, made her skin crawl. Ella, who'd been silent until now, looked up from her drawing. He's not imagining it. I feel it too, like someone's waking up down there. Emily turned to them both. Stay in the living room. I'll check it out. Down in the basement, the air felt heavier. She stood near the old trunk and held her phone close. For just a second, the screen blinked to life, then died again. Whatever was causing the field interference was growing stronger. She opened the trunk again and noticed something she hadn't seen before, a false panel along the back wall. Inside, it was a slim, leather-bound folder. She pulled it out slowly. Inside was a letter, typewritten. Dated June 1952, to whom it may concern. If you are reading this, the chain of custody has been breached, and legacy data must be evaluated by the current occupant. The person in possession of this letter is hereby acknowledged as the guardian of Civ Site 001. As per the provisions of Directive 11C, only the legal bloodline of the original coordinator may assume full clearance rights. Under no circumstances shall this authority be transferred without express consent. Protect the information. Protect the truth. It was signed with only 3 letters. AWR. Emily stood motionless, the words ringing in her head. She had legal clearance, not just inheritance, but a mandate. Later that night, she stared out the window of the upstairs bedroom while the children slept. The land stretched dark and quiet beyond the house, the woods still, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things were already in motion, something much larger than her, tied to a lineage she never knew she carried. Her fingers brushed the edge of the old map, now hidden under a floorboard. There was no going back, not after this. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that feels too thick to be natural. The old clock in the hallway had just struck midnight when the landline rang, a shrill, jarring sound that sliced through the quiet like a blade. Emily shot up from the living room couch, heart hammering. She hadn't given that number to anyone. She picked up slowly. Hello? Static answered her, then a voice, calm, deliberate, mechanical. If you value the safety of your children, you'll stop digging. Emily froze. Who is this? Stop looking into the past. Some truths were buried for a reason. Click. The line went dead. She stared at the receiver in her hand as the dial tone hummed back into her ear. Her blood felt cold. Whoever it was, they hadn't called to scare her. They called to warn her. Or threaten. Maybe both. She quickly checked the kids. Lucas was curled on his side, mumbling softly in his sleep. Ella lay still, her eyes fluttering beneath closed lids. Emily sat beside her, brushing strands of hair off her face, when she noticed the drawing. Ella had a notebook clutched in her small hands. A fresh page was filled with a symbol, an angular crest, jagged lines intersecting in a triangular form, like a broken compass surrounded by cryptic numbers. It wasn't something from a child's imagination. Emily snapped a photo and tiptoed out. The next morning, under the amber light of a cold autumn sun, she showed the sketch to Nathan Doyle. He studied it in stunned silence. "I've seen this," he said slowly. "Back when I was doing research at the Pentagon Archive. This was the insignia for Project Harrogate. It was a deep ops branch of a Cold War network called OISEC, supposedly dismantled in 1978. But my daughter drew it last night," Emily said, her voice hushed. "From a dream." Nathan's face darkened. Then either this place is activating memories in her that aren't hers, or someone's still running the game. They sat on the porch steps, overlooking the pasture as dry wind stirred the brittle weeds. Nathan pulled out his field notes, flipping through sketches and clippings until he landed on a map from a 1960s intelligence survey. "This entire area," he said, circling the property, "was once labeled as a VEN site, Vector Energy Node. It was a testbed for the Starbridge Initiative." Emily frowned. What was Starbridge? A network of underground relays and field receivers, early military GPS prototypes, before satellites were fully functional. It ran on electromagnetic convergence, powered by natural geology. And your land? He tapped the map. This was one of the central nodes. "So that's why we found the Cold War gear?" Emily said. Nathan nodded. "And it explains the antenna, but it doesn't explain the warning you got last night." Emily stood and looked toward the tree line. "Then we find out who sent it." They decided to comb through the basement once more, looking for anything they'd missed. While Emily searched through crates of dusty tools and unmarked boxes, Nathan scoured the property deeds again. That's when he found it, tucked inside a cracked folder taped to the bottom of a cabinet drawer. It was a legal order dated July 1983, issued by the Department of Administrative Oversight. The language was bureaucratic, but severe. "Maple Glen Parcel 2614-9 is to be decommissioned and removed from federal civil registries. Access restricted indefinitely. Signed and sealed." "They erased this place," Nathan whispered. "On paper, it doesn't exist." Emily stared at the document. "So we're living on a ghost property." That night, she set up new motion-activated cameras at the edges of the tree line. Hidden in birdhouses and old fence posts, their lenses pointed toward every path that led to the woods. If anyone came, she'd know, and someone did. At exactly 2:37 a.m., a single frame snapped on the infrared cam. 4 figures moved along the ridge, dressed in black, faces obscured. They were silent, efficient, like they knew the terrain. No license plates, no headlights, just shadowed outlines moving toward the barn and disappearing into the woods beyond. Emily downloaded the footage and sent it to an encrypted folder on a backup drive. Then she locked every door in the house and sat at the kitchen table until dawn. That morning, Lucas woke up saying his ears were buzzing. When Emily asked what he meant, he pointed to the air around him and said, "The buzzing tells me when something's about to break." Nathan watched the boy, wide-eyed. "He's feeling EM pulses," he said. "Most adults can't do that unless they've been exposed to long-term fields. But kids? Sometimes they're sensitive to shifts, especially near nodes like this." Emily rubbed her temples. "So now my son's a human radar?" "No," Nathan said. "He's a key." Emily looked out the window again, this time not at the sky, but at the ground beneath her feet. Secrets were buried here, deeper than the foundation, deeper than memory, and someone was trying very hard to keep them that way. But it was too late for that. She'd already started unearthing them. It was just after dawn when the black SUV rolled down the dirt road leading to Emily's farmhouse. The tires cracked over gravel in a rhythm too deliberate to be accidental. Emily was in the kitchen, pouring coffee with a hand that trembled slightly. Last night's hidden camera footage still fresh in her mind. No license plates, figures moving like shadows. And then, silence. She saw the vehicle pull up through the front window. Tinted glass, government clean. The kind of car that only ever meant one thing, authority. "Kids," she called out calmly but firmly, "stay upstairs. Don't come down until I say." The knock came, 3 sharp raps, not impatient, not hesitant, trained. Emily opened the door to a woman in a navy suit, mid-40s, steel gray eyes under neatly cropped auburn hair. No badge shown, no words spoken, just a sealed envelope extended forward, marked with a red-inked federal crest, and stamped, Level 7, Eyes Only. "I'm Special Agent Claire Monroe," the woman said, with the controlled ease of someone who had uttered that line hundreds of times before. "We need to talk. Alone." Emily nodded, led her inside, and closed the door behind them. The farmhouse suddenly felt smaller, the walls tighter. Claire didn't sit. She walked slowly through the living room, scanning photos, boxes, even the creaky ceiling fan. "You've triggered a dormant node," she said quietly, her back still turned. 10 days ago, a signal went active from coordinates matching this property. Ultra-low frequency, buried tech. It woke up satellites we haven't used since the Cold War. Emily blinked. "What kind of signal?" "Encrypted. ROT 47 protocol with triple shielding. That system was mothballed in 1982, but it's still hardwired to our Black Channel network. When it lit up, everyone from Langley to NORAD got a ping. That's why I'm here." Emily's throat felt dry. "I didn't mean to activate anything." Claire finally turned, her expression softening slightly. "We don't think you did it intentionally, but you're in possession of something that hasn't seen daylight in over 4 decades, and you might be the only one legally allowed to hold it." She handed Emily a manila folder. It was heavy and cold to the touch, as though it had just come out of a vault. On the cover, Inheritance Protocol 11, Lineage Restricted Access. Inside were scans of documents, some yellowed with time, others digitally reproduced. There were names, maps, blood type charts, even old census records. But one name froze Emily mid-breath. Lydia Jane Carter, 1949 to 1992. Civilian asset, classified Guardian, clearance tier red. Underneath, a faded photograph showed a woman standing near a wooden porch. She had Emily's jawline, Emily's eyes. "That's your mother," Claire said. "And yes, she wasn't your adoptive mother. She was your birth mother. Both she and your father were part of an embedded protection program. They were hiding from a threat we still don't fully understand." Emily staggered back a step. "But I was told I was adopted by distant cousins after an accident." Claire nodded. "The accident was a cover. Your parents were placed under deep code witness protection after an operation in West Germany went south. They were part of a classified logistics cell tied to this site, this very farm. When they were presumed compromised, the project was buried." Emily looked down at her hands. The name, the land, the dreams, the way the attic key had fit her palm like a memory. She wasn't just trespassing on government property, she was connected to it by blood. "The file says I'm a guardian?" Claire's voice softened. "In 1864, President Lincoln signed a presidential order creating a lineage of civilian guardians to protect what he called informational continuity during civil upheaval. It was never repealed, just forgotten, until now." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "You're saying I inherited a secret government archive?" "You didn't just inherit it," Claire said, stepping closer. "You activated it. That makes you responsible for it, whether you want to be or not." A long silence hung between them. The old farmhouse creaked as if reacting to its own history. "I need time," Emily whispered. Claire nodded. "You have 48 hours. After that, containment teams will be mobilized, and if you haven't decided to cooperate by then, this place will no longer be your home." Emily stared at her, heart pounding. "What does that mean?" Claire didn't answer. She just opened the front door, paused, and turned one last time. For what it's worth, she said, your parents would be proud. The SUV vanished down the dirt road the way it had come, quiet, exact, and impossibly final. Emily stood frozen in the living room, the manila folder clutched tight in her arms. Upstairs, the twins' laughter echoed faintly through the ceiling. They didn't know their world had just changed again. But she did, and this time, she wouldn't run. Claire Monroe's presence hadn't felt like a threat, at least not at first, but as the firelight flickered in the living room of the old farmhouse, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, Emily realized just how much weight the woman's words carried. The air had thickened, almost like it was waiting with bated breath for her to make a choice she couldn't take back. Claire leaned forward, clasping her hands on the edge of the table. Her voice was calm but firm, every syllable carefully chosen. We're offering you full federal protection, Emily. Relocation, new identities if needed, a secure future for your children. But in return, we need everything you've found. The documents, the devices, all of it. Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted to the manila folder Claire had laid out on the table, a folder thick with decades of secrets, shadowy programs, and buried truths. Somewhere inside those pages was the story of her own bloodline, tied to a network of intelligence threads that spanned over a century. She was no longer just a mother or a woman trying to hold her life together. She was the legal custodian of something America itself had lost track of. I need time, Emily finally said, her voice steady but low. You say I'm the rightful guardian, then let me act like one. Claire didn't protest. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. You don't have long. Upstairs, Lucas's fever had risen again. His cheeks flushed deep red, his breathing ragged. But it wasn't just the illness that disturbed Emily. It was the way every electronic device near him flickered or buzzed when he stirred. The baby monitor hissed and spat static. Her phone kept rebooting itself. Even the old thermostat on the wall glowed faintly, though it was unplugged. She pressed a cool towel against his forehead and whispered, I'm not going to let them take anything away from us, Lucas. Not again. Ella hadn't said much all afternoon. She sat curled in the old armchair by the window, clutching the drawing pad she rarely let out of her sight. As the storm rolled in that evening, thunder rumbling low like a warning, Ella finally looked up. Mommy, she said softly, the voices are louder tonight. Emily stiffened. What voices, honey? Ella hesitated. From the basement. They're not talking like we do. It's like they're remembering out loud. She held up the pad. A series of jagged lines and spirals covered the page, surrounding a crude sketch of the basement stairs and something beneath it, something circular, pulsing with lines that looked eerily like magnetic field diagrams. I tried to draw the sound, Ella explained. Emily felt a chill she couldn't shake. She glanced at the basement door, now locked and chained, since the last unexplained power surge. She hadn't told Claire everything. There were discoveries she'd kept private, instincts screaming at her not to give it all up. Not yet. That night, after the kids had finally fallen into a restless sleep, Emily crept back into the study. With the windows shuttered and her laptop battery charged from the generator, she began building a safeguard. Using a VPN and triple encryption layers, she uploaded digital scans of every document, every coded map, every intelligence roster, and every signature from people long dead, to a network of anonymous offshore servers. She renamed the folders in obscure languages and time-stamped them to look like junk data. It was tedious and paranoid, but she didn't care. Claire might be sincere, or she might be the most polite containment officer the government could find. Either way, Emily wasn't going to let herself be erased. When she finally leaned back from the screen, it was almost 2 a.m. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that settled heavy and unnatural. She was about to shut down the laptop when the camera feed flickered, just for a second. Then darkness. Every screen in the house went black. Emily froze. In the pitch-dark room, the air felt thick again, just like it had when Claire had first offered her the deal. She reached slowly for the flashlight, clicked it on, and swung it toward the hallway. Nothing. But just then, from somewhere beneath the floorboards came a sound. Not a creak, not footsteps. A low, vibrating hum, like a signal being transmitted through the very bones of the house. She didn't move, didn't breathe. It lasted 5 seconds, then stopped. The silence rushed back in like a wave, and she was left standing in a beam of flashlight, heart hammering. Somewhere behind her, the laptop restarted on its own. The screen flashed. A message appeared, just one line in bold white font against a black background. "We see you, Guardian." The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days, turning the driveway into a muddy trench and the trees surrounding the farmhouse into looming silhouettes against a gray sky. Emily stood in the study, holding a weathered, leather-bound book in her hands. It had been hidden behind a loose floorboard in the hallway, a floorboard she only discovered because Lucas had tripped over it the day before. The cover bore the initials L.J. Carter, embossed in faded gold leaf, barely visible now. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The first page was dated March 12th, 1935. The handwriting was meticulous, the kind of careful penmanship lost to time. What startled her more than the date or the name was the content. Detailed logs of surveillance, cryptic names, coded messages, and mentions of classified signal routing buried beneath the property. The journal wasn't a diary, it was an operational record. "Lucas, Ella," she called out softly. The twins appeared from the kitchen, Lucas still holding a disassembled walkie-talkie, and Ella clutching her sketch pad. "This belonged to someone named L.J. Carter. Do either of you recognize the name?" Lucas shook his head, but Ella's eyes narrowed. "I saw that name in my dream," she said quietly. "On a stone wall. Underground." Emily's pulse quickened. Later that evening, Nathan arrived with blueprints spread across the hood of his Jeep. He had been researching the original construction documents archived at the county registrar's office. "You're not going to believe this," he muttered, unrolling the yellowed pages. "There's a secondary passage, beneath the basement, beyond the main foundation. It wasn't built with the house. It's older." He traced a path from the cellar, past the known vault, toward a vague outline marked natural limestone cavity. "It's a cave system," Nathan said. "The journal you found might have been hidden there for decades." They waited until the children were asleep before investigating. Emily pried away a loose panel along the back wall of the cellar, revealing a narrow opening choked with cobwebs and dust. The air was dense and metallic. With flashlights in hand, they crawled through, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water echoing against stone. The tunnel descended steeply for over 50 feet, before widening into a chamber with walls lined in rock and rusted steel. On one side stood an old communications console, dead now, its switches frozen in time. On the opposite side, carved crudely into the limestone, were 3 initials, LJC. "It's not just a hiding place," Emily whispered. "It's a stronghold." The next day, Claire Monroe returned, without warning, as usual, but this time, she was different. The controlled professionalism had faded, replaced with something more personal, almost remorseful. "I used to work for a black ops division known only as the Watchers," Claire admitted. They were standing in the study, Emily's fingers still dusted from the cave. "Our job was to recover, or bury, anything the government considered dangerous. Not weapons, information, artifacts, truths too big for the public to handle." Emily narrowed her eyes. "And you're here because this place, it holds one of those truths?" Claire nodded. "Your family was entrusted to protect it. That's why they vanished off the grid. They weren't just hiding. They were safeguarding something the government didn't want found." The words had barely sunk in when the power cut out. The house plunged into darkness, save for the flickering glow of emergency lanterns. An eerie hum vibrated through the floorboards, like something mechanical stirring far below. The security monitors rebooted, but the external feeds remained black. Then, one by one, the cameras fizzled into static. Nathan rushed in from the front porch, soaked from head to toe. "We've got company, 2 vehicles, no license plates, headlights off." Claire drew her firearm without hesitation. "Get the kids. Go underground. Now." Emily didn't argue. She woke the twins gently but urgently, whispering directions as she wrapped them in blankets. "We're going to the hidden tunnel, just like we practiced." Lucas, half asleep, clutched her hand. "Ella dijo nada," Sus ojos estaban fijos en la ventana como si ya supiera lo que estaba viniendo. Nathan pulled back the floor panel in the cellar, revealing the crawl space. Claire covered their exit, staying behind to stall any intruders. The last thing Emily heard before dropping into the tunnel was the click of Claire's sidearm and the cold command in her voice. If they breach, delay them. The crawl through the passage felt eternal. Water dripped from above, dampening their clothes as they pushed deeper into the limestone cavity. The air thinned. Emily's breath grew shallower, but she kept going, dragging Ella with one hand, Lucas with the other. After an hour, they reached the far chamber and sealed the reinforced door from inside, a rusted iron wheel locking it in place. They waited in silence, curled on the cold stone floor. Lucas had begun to shiver, not from cold, but from something else, an invisible current that seemed to pulse around him. Emily checked her watch. They'd been underground for nearly 6 hours. Finally, Claire's voice crackled through an old emergency radio in the corner. They're gone, no casualties, but this isn't over. They'll be back, with more. Emily glanced at her children, their eyes wide but steady. For the first time, she saw something deeper in them, something beyond fear. Resolve. The sun rose over the fields of Maple Glen with a strange hush in the air, as if even nature had paused to await what was about to unfold. Emily stood on the porch of the farmhouse, the scent of coffee rising from the mug in her hand, her eyes scanning the gravel path that led to the property. This day wasn't like the others. Today wasn't about survival or secrets or even safety. Today was about power, and who had the right to wield it. An unmarked black SUV pulled in just after 8 a.m., followed by a convoy of sedans and a single armored van. Claire Monroe stepped out first, her face unreadable, followed by 2 men in gray suits with earpieces and folders tucked under their arms. Behind them, a woman in a dark green pantsuit carried a leather briefcase embossed with the seal of the National Archives. "Emily Carter?" the woman asked, approaching with a clipped tone. Emily nodded silently. They didn't shake hands. This wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. The living room had been rearranged to resemble a makeshift negotiation chamber. The children were upstairs with headphones and puzzles, and Nathan stood near the stairs like a sentinel, ready if needed. A small American flag rested on the mantel, its fabric gently stirring under the ceiling fan. Claire opened the folder first. "This," she said, placing a document on the table, "is a formal proposal for a national security preservation agreement. It allows for immediate federal acquisition of all recovered materials under emergency order." Emily's jaw clenched. She didn't look at the paper. "In return," Claire continued, "we offer relocation, financial compensation, and lifelong federal protection for you and your children." Emily met Claire's eyes. "No." The room froze. "Excuse me?" one of the gray-suited men asked. Emily leaned forward. "You don't get to erase history because it's inconvenient. I will not hand over something that belonged to my family for generations without knowing what you plan to do with it." "It's classified information," the man countered. "Exactly," she snapped. "And yet, somehow, it ended up buried in my basement. That makes it personal." Claire raised a hand to calm the tension. "Then what do you propose, Emily?" Emily stood. Her voice was calm, steady. "I propose that the site remains under my stewardship. I live here. I protect it. You can have controlled access under agreed-upon terms. I want full transparency, shared research access, and independent oversight." There was a silence, heavy and charged. The woman from the archives whispered something into the ear of the CIA rep. He nodded slowly. "She has legal standing," she said finally. "Her lineage, the bloodline clause, it checks out. She qualifies under the 1871 Protective Heritage Provision." The CIA agent sighed. Claire glanced at Emily and gave the barest nod. "Then we negotiate," Claire said. What followed was 4 hours of terse dialogue, legal citations, and historical precedent. Emily didn't back down. Neither did they. But as the clock passed noon, an agreement took shape. The children came downstairs as signatures were being inked. Lucas tilted his head, frowning. "Why is the room buzzing?" Ella walked over to Emily, touching her mother's wrist. "It feels like the walls are holding their breath." Claire, visibly shaken, turned to the archive representative. Run a scan, now. Within minutes, a portable device picked up faint magnetic anomalies, readings consistent with electromagnetic resonance fields. Lucas and Ella stood in the center, unaware they were the cause. They're resonance sensitives, one technician whispered. Echo traits from pre-electromagnetic mapping research. We haven't seen this since the Civil War era. Emily stared, wide-eyed. What does that mean? It means, Claire said slowly, your children aren't just inheritors of a location. They're part of what it protects. By sunset, the document was signed. It bore a new name, the Special Civil Custodianship Treaty. For the first time in U.S. history, a civilian was granted co-authority over a classified heritage site. As the officials departed, Emily stood by the window, watching their cars disappear into the dusk. Nathan approached her quietly. You did it? Emily turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. We're just beginning. The wind picked up, rattling the porch swing. Inside the farmhouse, beneath floorboards and forgotten doors, something old stirred, and something new awakened. The air in the lowest level of the underground vault felt different, denser, charged. Emily hadn't expected the narrow stone staircase behind the reinforced steel door to lead so far beneath the earth. The flashlight in her hand flickered as if protesting the depth, the cold, or perhaps the secrets pressed into the rock walls around her. Lucas walked ahead of her, unusually silent, while Ella trailed close behind, gripping the edge of her mother's jacket. They reached a heavy iron hatch embedded into the stone floor. The hinges groaned as Emily pulled it open, revealing a second ladder descending into pitch darkness. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight caught a rusted placard bolted to the concrete wall. Archival Room B, classified storage. The room beyond was vast and silent, filled with rows upon rows of metal cabinets and crates. Dust clung to every surface, but the air felt preserved, like time itself had been paused in this chamber. Emily opened the nearest cabinet. Inside were reels of microfilm, hundreds of them, organized by dates that stretched back to 1864. Each reel was encased in its original container, labeled with cryptic tags like S-14, Civilian Surveillance, Reconstruction Period, or X-22, Lunar Signal Intercepts, 1969. This is a century and a half of buried history, she whispered. Lucas gently placed his palm on a console against the far wall. It was an old-style input board, covered in brass switches and cracked glass screens. As soon as his fingers made contact, the machine sputtered to life with a deep hum. The ceiling began to glow with a soft blue light, illuminating the entire room in a pulsating rhythm. Then something shifted. A section of the floor slid open with a slow grind, revealing a pedestal rising from the center of the chamber. On it sat a dusty box, no bigger than a shoebox, carved with a strange geometric symbol neither Emily nor Nathan had seen before. But Ella, drawn to it as if by instinct, approached and opened it without hesitation. Inside she found a letter, yellowed, brittle, and sealed with a wax insignia in the shape of a balanced scale. The handwriting was elegant and precise, dated March 3rd, 1871. To the one who walks between truth and silence, if you are reading this, then the balance has shifted. I was the first to keep watch, and you may be the last. The archives you now protect are not relics. They are warnings. Our nation was built on both vision and fear. The fear cannot be allowed to speak louder. Catherine Bellamy, the first keeper of balance. Emily held her breath. The name Catherine Bellamy echoed something deep inside her. Stories her grandmother once told her, names whispered in childhood, dismissed as folklore. At that moment, Lucas stepped forward and touched the device again. This time, the entire room reacted. Light raced across the walls, feeding into a grid etched into the stone like an invisible map. It expanded upward to the ceiling, forming a luminous outline that revealed something far larger than the room itself. A magnetic, topographical map of the entire United States. Pulses of color lit up at specific points across the country, small towns, mountain passes, plains, and lakes. It wasn't random. It was a network. These are energy nodes, Nathan said in awe, magnetic intelligence points. each one probably tied to hidden archives, like this. Emily felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about one farm in Missouri. This was about a network buried beneath American soil, connected by intention and secrecy. Claire Monroe appeared in the doorway of the chamber, carrying a black folder and wearing an expression somewhere between reverence and finality. "This is the end of the road for me," she said quietly, "and the beginning for you. As of today, guardianship is no longer in the hands of government agencies. It's yours." She handed Emily the folder. Inside was a formal transfer document stamped and verified. Title of custodial oversight, Legacy Asset 492. Beneath it, the clause read, "Transfer is irrevocable upon confirmation of direct bloodline to the original keeper." Claire looked at the twins. They're already responding to it. Their sensitivity to the electromagnetic field isn't random. It's hereditary. Lucas was still watching the glowing map. "It's like the Earth's nervous system," he said, tracing the lines with his finger. "Ella Asentio. It's speaking again." Claire smiled faintly, her voice soft. "They'll learn to listen in ways we never could. Protect them, Emily. Train them. You're not just keeping history safe anymore. You're guarding the code that holds it together." As Claire turned and left, her footsteps echoed against the stone, swallowed slowly by the silence. Emily stood in the middle of the glowing room, the twins by her side, and stared at the threads of light spreading across the country. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a custodian of truths that could reshape how the nation understood itself. She opened a blank journal, clicked her pen, and wrote the first line. "History does not whisper. It waits. And today, I chose to listen." Because the truth didn't live in textbooks. It lived in the dark, in the quiet, beneath the floorboards, and behind the locked doors of forgotten places. And now, finally, it had a voice again. Winter came slowly to Maple Glen, wrapping the Missouri countryside in a hush of frost and morning stillness. Beneath the weathered farmhouse that had once stood silent for decades, a quiet revolution was now underway. Hidden beneath layers of soil and history, Emily Carter's underground civil preservation center, codenamed Beacon Hollow, was alive with purpose. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a nerve center of truth, a vault of unredacted memory in a world that had long forgotten how to look beyond the surface. The government had kept its word. With the signed civilian guardianship accord, Emily was granted full custodianship over the archive site. No agencies, no chains of command, only accountability, truth, and trust. Engineers discreetly installed clean energy systems and electromagnetic shielding, but no signs pointed to the entrance and no maps acknowledged its existence. It was meant for those who needed it, not those who sought to control it. Each day, Emily taught her children how to read between lines most adults had stopped questioning. Lucas, whose sensitivity to magnetic fields had evolved into something closer to instinct, now helped calibrate detection arrays that spanned miles. Ella, soft-spoken but unshakable, led oral history sessions where survivors of long-suppressed events shared stories never recorded in public archives. They weren't training as agents. They weren't spies. They were guardians of balance, of a legacy rooted not in power, but in truth. Nathan Doyle, whose research had helped unearth the web behind it all, visited weekly. He was working on compiling a new series of public white papers, The Civil Signal, to subtly introduce forgotten history back into mainstream discourse. Claire Monroe, now off duty and retired from her shadowbound post, occasionally dropped by as a mentor. But even she admitted during a late-night fireside chat, "I thought I knew what justice meant. Turns out I only knew what protocol allowed." Then, one crisp March morning, the alert came. The electromagnetic detection system, set to scan for shifts across the national energy grid, lit up with new readings. A spike had emerged near the sand hills of Nebraska, a location previously flagged in one of the Civil War-era microfilms Emily had yet to decode fully. The pattern matched the same resonance Lucas had triggered months earlier when the map of the United States had briefly come alive in light beneath their feet. Emily stood on the farmhouse porch, eyes fixed on the horizon as the wind whipped through the bare trees. In her hand was the old journal of L.J. Carter, now updated with her own entries, ink scrawled beside ink, one generation speaking to the next. Behind her, Lucas and Ella were already packing gear. This wasn't an ending. It was a ripple in a much deeper pond. And as the sun broke through the gray morning clouds, illuminating the small, tattered American flag atop the barn, Emily smiled. Not for what she'd protected, but for what she was about to discover. Not for the government, not for glory, but for the truth waiting to be found. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't just a story. This was a journey, a thread pulled from the edges of forgotten history, woven into the life of a single mother who never asked to carry the weight of a nation's buried truths. Emily Carter didn't sign up to be a guardian. She didn't chase conspiracy or crave power. She just wanted a second chance, for her kids. But when the past comes knocking, some people step back, and others, like Emily, open the door and choose to stand their ground. Maybe that's why this story resonates, because in a world full of noise, division, and curated half-truths, there's something deeply human about watching one person say, "No more silence." And maybe you're wondering, could this really happen? Could entire networks of hidden knowledge lie dormant beneath our feet, beneath our homes, our towns, our assumptions? Could a single family be all that stands between what we're allowed to know and what we need to know? You're not alone in asking. That's why we created this series, not just to tell stories, but to reignite the questions we've been told to stop asking. Stories like this one remind us that truth doesn't knock politely. It breaks through floorboards. It hums in the dark. It calls to the people brave enough to listen. So now it's your turn. Tell us, what part of Emily's journey hit hardest for you? Was it the letter from Lincoln, hidden in a trunk that history forgot? The flickering cameras that knew when to lie? The kids, Lucas and Ella, who could hear what the world had stopped listening to? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. Your words fuel this community more than you know. We read every single one, not just to hear what you think, but to understand what these stories unlock in you. And if you felt that pull, the one Emily followed, then hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of what Beacon Hollow is protecting. There are other nodes out there, other signals, other people, just like Emily, waking up to the quiet hum of truth buried deep in their backyards. From remote Appalachian hollows to dusty Texas plains, forgotten silos in Nevada, and long-abandoned mines in Colorado, the story continues. You'll want to be here when it does. And if you believe, like we do, that stories have the power to challenge what we're told and connect us to something real, something older than headlines and deeper than archives, then join us. Be part of this unfolding history. Let's search together, ask louder, and guard what matters. Because the truth isn't just worth finding, it's worth defending. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below. And when the next signal comes through, you'll be the first to know. We'll see you in the next story.